Dave Sobel is a technical journalist. I've known him for quite a while. He's excellent at what he does. In this podcast, we talk about the somewhat controversial topic of managed service providers. What exactly is a managed service provider? Are there very large ones? What is the state of outsourced IT? These companies. I used to run a managed service provider company in the early 90s, and what it takes to control and to monitor IT for small to medium sized businesses, the discipline involved. And then there's very large companies who feel that they're a managed service provider as well. It's an interesting topic. We go back and forth a little bit. Is the definition interesting? Is it controversial? What exactly does it do, and what does it mean for businesses of all size? Especially in this world where security is such an issue now, we hear about it all the time. It's a great conversation. Thanks for listening. I'm Joey Pinz. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? As I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion in their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, sure. Always happy to riff.
That's right. Exactly right. So let's get right into it. What is an MSP?
Well,
I did a little Wikipedia search and I was surprised by the results. But please go.
So the context of this is always kind of one of those big questions, and I'm like the big academic nerd, right? To ask like, what is an MSP? It's almost like a philosophical question for me. What I always thought it should be, right? The pure version of it is an IT service provider who is delivering services to their customers, where it's a predefined set of services delivered based on an outcome, not based on time, and it is done via a contractual basis. Like that's my like academic nerd definition of it. And the reason that's important is because I think there's a lot of people that are super focused on like what's in that bundle to define themselves as a managed services provider versus my thinking, where like I think it's somebody who engages proactively with a set of services ongoing.
Very interesting. So can a break fix provider be an MSP?
No, because by its very definition of the way I'm defining it, you are delivering a set of services not on demand. Like it's something that I do repeated for you on a contractual basis. And so thus a break fix provider isn't that. A break fix provider is just someone who responds when I call them. And that isn't, and what's funny is everyone always gets hung up on break fix thinking it's like some bad thing. It's just another way of engaging, right? Like I could have just a guy on call that calls me and works with me on time, and that's the way that I engage. I could do all kinds of services in there, right? Like I could have, we call it a break fix provider, but that's almost limiting. I could just call somebody and tell them I want to do patching. I want them to work on my backups. And all I do is time-based transactions. I could be a head shop, right? I could sell people head shop. So it gets into the why. And it's all where I would always ask back is the like, well, who are we talking to, right? Because we're having like a super we're having a super academic conversation about it, but it's like, well, who does this answer matter to?
Very good question. And yeah, so we both had managed service provider companies. I didn't originally intend that as such. I had a technology company who did network support back in the 90s and did application development. And then eventually we moved to proactive flat rate services that turned into a managed service provider, similar to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and mine, like I always started, but I'll tell you, I started with one basic idea when I started mine. And that was, I want to get paid every single month. Like that literally was like my basic thought when I was starting the business was, I want to be paid every single month, not having to chase work. And so I was like, what can I put into a contract that people will buy from me? And that was the genesis of managed services for me.
Very interesting. So when we both talk to a lot of IT technical companies, a lot of IT vendors, and, I predominantly think this conversation is for them because, I always hear that, just on Wikipedia, what is an MSP, managed service provider? And number one is IBM on their
But by the
list.
way, they are a managed services provider. Like,
Right.
and there's a bunch of big players in this space, and like this is fun. This is also fun. Like, if we're just sort of riffing on it. I mean, I live in the DC metro area,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like the weird unicorn here that has never done a lick of government work in my entire career.
Mm.
Like, there's like every time I talk to somebody here locally, they're like, "You don't work for the government?" It's like, "Yeah, I've never done a government bit of work, and I've barely done anything even like one step removed. I'm like not worked from like a subcontractor or been on like some related product. Like, I've only done commercial work, but I have friends that have delivered what you and I would call managed services for very large 3-letter organizations, right? Like 3-letter
Mm.
acronymed government agencies that are in that class, right? That are in that big company approach. And some of them even like listen to my podcast, right? Because they're like, there's stuff in
Right.
there that is what you do. It's not about size. Everyone always thinks managed services like this is some SMB play. It's like, no, there's managed services at all levels. They might look a little different. The things you consume might be a little bit different, but they're still the same basic concept, particularly when you think about it from my definition.
So should we call it regional MSP? Because generally, MSPs that we're talking about, support a particular region, like the DC area or where I am in New Haven.
Well, again, it comes down to who are we talking to? We're
Mm.
an industry that loves to define things, right? Like
Yeah.
we love acronyms, we love names for things, we want to call it something, we want to classify it something. It's useful for us inside of our own industry to talk about this stuff in order to try and understand who one another are and who we can partner with or who we can go to market with or who we compete with. But I actually think we over rotate on this stuff when it comes to caring about it from the customer's perspective. IT provider remains like the number one way of talking about it when I
Mm.
talk to customers. And I try and spend a little bit more of my time thinking about the MSP themselves and their customers than I worry about the other side anymore, because I actually find that the more time I spend thinking that way, the better my reasoning comes out.
Mm. Mm. So those three-letter and acronym big companies who say that they're a managed service provider. I mean, as far as companies that they serve, is that companies that MSPs that we're talking about, would they serve those same customers? Are they taking customers from those MSPs?
Nah, I mean it's so, and the analogy I make, I talk to investors oftentimes who try and understand this
Mm.
space, and the way that I like to talk about it is I like to compare it with the world of CPAs. And in the CPA market, you see a ton of you see all different sizes, right? There's big CPA companies, there's small companies, it's all different varieties. And I don't generally think of the small local business calling up the very large accounting firm to do their accounting. I
Mm.
guess it's theoretically possible, right? Like, but you don't see that. And you might see like a nationwide chain, like an H&R Block or something along those lines, who are designed for that, but they are often still regional, right? Like, they have a little regional office and they've got local providers. I like to think of it a lot more like that. And I think of it, small likes to do business with small, medium likes to do business with medium, large likes to do business with large, and that's generally the way this is done.
Very interesting. So when trying to partner, when managed service providers are trying to partner, perhaps, is there opportunities to partner with those large three-letter firms that, should there be a different definition? Should we partner with them, and should that we have a different way of discussing us?
if it's useful, right? Like, I
Mm,
mean, and again, this goes back to my statement of we spend a lot of time worrying about this stuff.
right.
If we are struggling to communicate or struggling to work together, then yes, we need to refine this. Or if we want to have this debate over a beer because it's fun and we like the academic argument, and I do, right? Like I'm one of those nerds
Yes.
that does, then we have it. But I think we worry too much, and for me, that oftentimes is actually where I focus a lot. Is I want to make sure we're spending our times on the things that matter, and I'm not sure worrying about it that much actually makes a difference.
Very good. And if we kind of switch directions, like we have a lot of value added resellers, a lot of VARs that are making the transition to managed services. So, what do we say? If a VAR is selling VoIP, for example, there's plenty of those, right, that are just selling one business line. Can they be called a managed service provider?
Who cares? Again, it's back to the
Mm,
I just want to analyze them on the way that they do business. And what's interesting is we're also trying to get to this pure, you're trying to get to this pure definition.
right,
And when we get into the trenches and we dig into the data, most of the top performers have a collection of all. Like if I'm talking to a typical managed services provider, I know that there's a portion of their revenue that is actually based on selling stuff, right? That is about
mm,
selling equipment or selling software or selling that stuff. Like calling him a managed services provider might exclude the fact that there's that portion of his business.
mm,
And they're probably selling what we, in the value added reseller or VAR, right? That means they're adding some value to the sale. That's as
that's
simple
right.
as I sell you some computers and I install them. Right? Like that's the value add. Well, that's a nice business, right? Like I like selling project work that is profitable, that drives it, and by the way, that will oftentimes set me up for my managed services. And so we don't want to talk about it in this way where it's like, well, you're a managed services provider, and so you just do managed services. Like, nah, I'm pretty sure you're doing a mix of things. And by the way, if I get into the nerd data, like the best in class guys are doing a
Right.
mix of things. Like we know it because each of the pieces feed the business. And by the way, some of the guys like do break fix work because it's oftentimes a way of acquiring new customers. If you're pushing
Right.
away somebody who calls and says, "Help, I need help," and you go, "Well, the only way I'm going to help you is if you sign my managed services contract." Like you may actually be pushing away potential work, so they may have a group that is focused on doing that. So it's a mix, right? And so we don't want to get to the point where we're trying to classify everybody and we've lost the subtlety of what they're actually doing.
Last I saw, the breakdown was approximately for a managed service provider that we're discussing around 75 to 80% recurring, 10% project, 10% equipment, which is non-recurring. Do you agree with that?
Maybe. I actually am expecting that to rotate. I'm expecting to see more of the services work because if I think about my provider of the future, they look a lot more like a Salesforce consultant than they do a guy who's been
Mm,
running infrastructure. And that's a lot more project work. There is a healthy dose of I'm in there doing training, I'm in there helping doing business process analysis, like, and I would actually expect that project number to grow versus shrink, and be
hmm.
more of revenue. And so, what I actually a real healthy number that I look for is are they covering their expenses on monthly recurring flat out, because
Right.
once you cross that line, now you've got a real stable business that you can build on top of. And maybe you're making a ton of money on project work, but your monthly recurring is all covering your monthly nut. I don't care as much what the breakdown is if your structure is good that way.
Yeah. I guess that is true. I just remember there's plenty of great MSP coaches that we both know, and I just kind of remember hearing those numbers, and I think those kind of rang true. But again, I sold my MSP 2 years ago
Yeah,
now,
and
so
look,
I'm
I
not.
mean, it's there's tons of approaches to this, and we get into the whole coaching thing, right? Like I always make the
Mm,
statement of a system is always better than no system, right? And for many
right.
MSPs, they don't have something, so they'll engage with some system, and that will make it better. I'm also not so hung up on being a purist on this stuff that
Mm,
many in our space are. Like there's a lot of people that get angry at me when I say things like, "Well, just do it this other way," and they make it out where it's like, "Well, that's not best practice." Or that's and oftentimes I'm looking like, "Yeah, the best practice sometimes is what just a bunch of people say they do." Like there's not actual data that tells me that's the thing that makes it do it. Now there often is also data to it, right? And if you can make me an argument of performance and stuff, and so for example, there's some coaches that do leverage that kind of stuff, but there's others that are just say, well, this is way, the 20 people that I've talked to do it. Okay, well that's an idea and that's a vetted idea, but it's not necessarily a best practice.
yeah, very true. So I talk to a lot of vendors, a lot of IT vendors that want to work with MSPs, but it does come up often that they say, well, we're an MSP too, and it's a big company that we're, some of those three-letter companies you talk about. What do you think the discussion should be at that point?
Well, so I mean, for me, my immediate first question is, okay, cool. Tell me what you're doing on that side. Tell me about who
Mm,
your end customers look like, and tell me about the way that you engage on a contractual basis, and enlighten me, because either one of two things will come of that. Either they really are right, right, like, and they can
right.
explain it, or I can quickly understand that maybe you don't actually understand what that word means.
Mm.
Channeling the Princess
Because
Bride. I do not think that means what you think it means.
that's right. Uh, because you have, especially in the security space, you have these providers that are, that may be, a secure operations center, there might be SOCs, and, they may also say, well, we're a SOC MSP as well, and so, that kind of graze the area. So, is it something that, let's reverse it now, go back to the MSP. Is it something that, the MSP, when they're looking to have partners, to increase their stack, what we call their product stack, to support their clients,
Right.
should they be concerned at whether these companies consider themselves an MSP or not?
Yeah, and this is again where my pushback really is that I think too many people in this space worry too much about the tools and the back end of their business than they worry about the front end of their business. Um,
Hmm.
if I was comparing this to the restaurant business, we spend way too much time talking about the ovens and the spatulas than we do about what it's like to sit down and who's interacting with you and what the food tastes like. like we
Very
spend
interesting.
so much time talking about the back end of the business when the front end is what actually matters. Um, and that is, I mean, if I look at the P&L of the typical managed services provider, the number one expense line item is labor. By like
Hmm.
leaps and bounds, it's the most expensive thing on your books is the people that you employ to deliver the services. Now, yeah, you can make them better with tools, and you can you think about it in all kinds of craftsmanship, right? Like and say like a good woodworker with bad tools is going to still struggle, but a great woodworker still with bad tools still going to do a really great job, right? And
Hmm.
it's also about the experience and the way that they work with you and how you interact. I don't think we spend nearly enough time as an industry, particularly focused in the SMB, of thinking of those portions of the question.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I assert that most MSPs are overtooled, and I know that they're generally technology led, like mine was. I can remember a story. We were 4 or 5 years into the business. We were doing well. We got a bunch of clients, and we started getting way too many tools because we, at the trade shows and thought we needed them. And I'll never forget, I told my father was an Italian immigrant, kind of very straight line, kind of, it was a very poor farmer in Italy. And I said, Dad, we're going to have to get bigger, offices because, we're growing so much. And I'll never forget his story where he said, Tony Luigi in Northern Italy would buy watermelons for 1,000 pounds, 1,000 lira. They would go over to Switzerland and sell them for 1,000 lira. And after a month, Tony would say, Luigi, we're not making any money. And Luigi would say, I know, we need a bigger truck. So, the idea is, you're exactly right. Cover the expenses. Are you using too many? Do you have too many tools that you're not using? Since MSPs are so technology led, perhaps they lose sight of that. Your thoughts?
Well, they've been able to get away with it for a very long time. So I always like to quip, I get in the DeLorean, right? And I go back in time and I look back at the early days of the technology industry, and you made money selling the stuff, right? You made money on the PC sales, and then you made really good money on installing the PC. And then even through the managed services market, you made really good money on managing it. But I think the struggle right now is that a lot of providers are over indexing on how important they are on managing things. When I think the year is 2021, for the most part, the tech just works. It just kind of works. It really just does. And there's lots of ways where, and even for most users, they can kind of muddle through on most of the basic things. You don't need to keep them running at quite the same way than you did before. And where it's much harder, the real bit that's harder is, are you using the right stuff? Are you using the right technology? Is it playing together? Are you getting the benefits of technology in your business? That's a business conversation. All of the previous conversations were technical ones. And what I want to see happen is more people leap from, and I know it's hard, but more into those conversations about running the business and using technology to make it a good business. That includes security, that includes maintenance. I'm not dismissive of that stuff, but the lead is not, I'll keep your stuff running. The lead is, do you want your technology investment to make you money? Do you want it to actually be a profit center and something that you're really enabling your business? And that means making it do more than just run. And that's hard. And I get it that it's hard, and it's outside their comfort zone, and it's not something you solve by just buying another tool. It's something that you really got to build business capability around doing it. But by the way, it's also way easier than ever before to just go deploy some technology. I laugh and go, we're both former business owners. I've got a business now, right? I launched my MSP in 2002, and man, it was hard. There was a lot of getting I think about QuickBooks as a great example, right? QuickBooks was a pain, right? I install it. I got to make sure that it's all working. I got to make I've got to learn it. It was this ugly, horrible thing. I hate QuickBooks. I hated QuickBooks. But in my 2019 business that I launched, I use QuickBooks Online. I love QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online is the greatest thing ever because it's taken away all the complexity, and it's just a cloud service. I don't even have to think about it, and I just log in, and everything is easy to use, and it integrates with all my other stuff, and it pulls and it just works. It's really kind of a delight to run that system. And then I connect it with everything else, and I get all this data, and I get insights, and I don't have to run any of it, any of it. And for me, I look at that and I think about what I would consider the current modern business. I'm it involves a whole bunch of systems like that. The power of what I can do is my technologist brain allows me to understand where to leverage it, where to integrate it, how to make it efficient. Yeah, selling that, right? As opposed to the old days where I made sure, was QuickBooks up? Did it work? The problems are different.
Yeah, the maturity of the technology, the move to the cloud it's just increased by so much, and certainly has helped the MSPs. You can't help but wonder, have some of those MSPs moved along with it? Do they realize it's there? I had the same as QuickBooks was just terrible. So we needed a server for it. You could tell it's this old interface, and I've moved to QBO, QuickBooks Online, and it's wonderful. It connects to my payroll, and it's just the way it should be. So if we go, so we've kind of loosely defined we didn't loosely define. We defined what an MSP is, and others may have other definitions. But your point is exact. Who really cares at that point?
Right.
The MSPs know who they are. Those three-letter MSPs, those larger MSPs know who they are, and the customers know who they are. So if we take it one step further, and we say to those IT vendors, what should you understand about MSPs to better work with them? I have this conversation very often with them. What do you say to that?
So I always say there's a couple of things that I always quip with them. First off, understand what it is that you offer that is actually unique, and be very clear about defining that. Because too many vendors spend all this time and they sound all the same. The example I use right now is always these security vendors. They always tell me, we'll make sure everything is completely secure, and we make sure that we end to end, and we make sure the customer is completely secured, and it's done in a very profitable kind of. And I'm looking and go, yeah, you and everybody else does that. So why, what are you different? And then they'll come to me and they'll like describe it, and it uses so many acronyms and so much. And I'm like, I don't even understand what you do, to not understand what you need. And thus I can't put you in the context of anything else. So I would almost say, like, I want vendors to be much more clear about what it is that they offer and why people need it. Spend more time on that. But then additionally, understand, the second bit is understand that when you're talking to a provider, they are putting you in a context of other things. And you have to understand where you fit in that stack of stuff. And you don't work in isolation, right? And so you need to understand where you fit into that ecosystem. And if you don't understand, go learn that, right? Because the most frustrating thing for a provider is to spend all their time trying to understand, where do you fit in? How do you work? Like, where, like, are you competing with them? Are you not competing with them? Like, and again, reinforcing, you fit in an ecosystem. You have people you compete with. You have people you're complementary with. It's okay to say who you're complementary with and even who you compete with. Because, by the way, don't think we're not going to figure that stuff out. A quick Google search tells me who your competitors are. You not acknowledging them, all it does is slow this down. So understand you're fitting into a context. Play that game, and it will work better. And then the final bit is remember that you are trying to help that provider and their customers with it. You've got to understand both sets of the business. Is you're not just to the provider, but you are also to the end user. You've got to have the alignment of value all the way through the chain. So now I've got sort of given vendors a bunch of stuff, but that for me is the stuff that I really focus on. Is you don't understand these things, and then you've been told, well, I need to work with a provider to get to the small companies, and you haven't gone further than that. And by the way, this is all, there's so many resources for this, like so many resources on learning this. Guys like Joe that are working, like literally working on teaching vendors this stuff. There's programs for this. You and your team need to go do your homework and come with, and it's okay to be wrong. Like, it's okay to come out and iterate on this, but understand the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. The discipline of features versus value, and even MSPs, many business owners don't really understand that. Whereas, they kind of inundate you with all these features and features and features, but what does it really do instead of the actual value? And I have had long conversations with vendors about the relationship of, you are selling to the MSP. The MSP will then take that and sell it to their clients. You're not going to talk to their clients. I've had vendors say to me, well, the MSP just needs to wave our flag to their clients and they'll just start buying from them. And the client wants one throat to choke, and it's that MSP. They decide
Right.
what partners to bring on and
I I
what's going to be
tell
in their
I
price
tell
tag.
anybody that's trying to understand the space to play this game. In
Mm,
your daily life for the next 2 weeks, I used to say week, but now we're all like now we don't travel as much, right? So it's harder to do. But for the next 2 weeks, I want you to talk to every single small business that you have an interaction with and ask them the simple question, hey, who runs your computers? And I want you to do this for every single business that you interact with over the next 2 weeks. So that when you go to your doctor or your dentist, right? If you're going to talk to your
mm,
accountant, if you're going to talk to the restaurant guy, the restaurant owner, the little shops that you go into, if you go into the library, like, I mean, like literally, like every business you go into, I want you to ask the question, hey, who works on your computers? Because you will get the gambit of answers to understand who you're dealing with. Sometimes it'll be, well, the owner's cousin works on the computers, right? It'll literally be some answer like that. To we have a guy on staff. To we have a company that we work with, and you will get a sense of this space just by asking that question. But the second thing you'll get a sense of is the understanding of the customer of how little they know about their own technology, because you have to use
right.
the phrasing, who works on your computers? If you go more
Mm.
complicated than that, you'll get blank stares. Test it. It's good fun. This is it's a great way to understand the market.
Yeah, don't ask who manages your technology. That'll just they'll get everything looped
Right.
in
But if
there, and
you just ask
yeah,
them who
yeah,
runs the computers,
right,
you will
right.
get a great sense of this market. And all of a sudden, you'll understand all of the different kinds of people that are working on it.
Very interesting. That's a really great exercise. I like to, I don't know, be the man on the street with that maybe sometime and ask.
It's
So
great
we
fun.
talked. Yeah, I think it would be. So we talked about what the vendor can do to better understand how MSPs work, and like you said, get a clear definition of what you do, how the MSP works. I have some vendors that say, well, we have a VAR and an MSP channel, and we just kind of treat them the same way. And I would argue that they're different, but there may be some overlap there. Get a focus group. Understand how MSPs work, and sell value. So conversely, if we go to the MSP now and we say, how can you better find a vendor to work with? How do what should you look for in your vendors when you're bringing your tools on to support your clients? What do you
So
think?
my number one, I have to absolutely 100% start with, figure out what business problem you're solving before you go shopping for a tool. Because so often in this space we find people that are find tools and then try and plug them in. No, start with the business problem you are trying to solve for your customers. Ideally, customers you already have that are asking you to solve it. And then design your solution to it, and then identify the tools that fit into that. But number one, more than anything else, is start with that. Again, technology people start with the tool. They start with well, I must have this tool. It's why I'm completely controversial these days on my thinking on RMMs, because everyone just comes out this statement of like, oh my God, you have to have an RMM. And I go like, do you? Like, for what? If you've defined a set of services, maybe, but maybe you've defined another set of services, or maybe there's another approach to that. Focus back on the service and then identify which tools liken to that. And there is more than one way to do this. There is not one answer. It's why I love this space, is that there are tons of answers that work in different ways. Now there are patterns, and there are, there again, you can find best practices, but that's not to say you cannot forge your own way. And you're always looking to balance that, like, I need to forge enough of my own way to be different and follow enough of the guidance to make sure that I'm profitable. Like, and you want to balance that, because if you look like everybody else, you look like everybody else, and you are interchangeable and a commodity. So you've got to find that balance.
Yeah, that's really, really well said. I remember I used to have quarterly business reviews with our clients, and we would try to figure out how are things going. Is there anything else you need? And if we found a need, if I found a need, I would try to go back and find a solution. If I didn't have a tool for it, I'd ask peers, etc. But you're right. You know, all too often we go back to the vendors where they just say, we're just security or whatever we are. We do all this, but then you have to go back and explain that to the MSP does have to explain it back to their client. So you're right. Have a problem, then find a solution. Don't have a solution for problems that aren't there yet.
Right, exactly. And remember, you can over-engineer this. Sometimes simplicity is the way to go. And particularly I'd be remiss if I didn't layer in some security here and sort of say that, you've over-engineering, over complexity, over tooling is just asking to be hacked. Because the more simple it is, the more secure it is. And the less you've exposed the attack surface. Like, one of the reasons why, like, I am very pro kind of cloud and simplification is also the less I have to attack, the better. The less systems I
Right.
have, the less complexity I have, the more I can eliminate things, the more that I have made this simple and have less attack surface. And so that there's an element of, you've got to also balance that if you do too much, you're introducing that chaos that is what hackers want.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, lower the amount of vulnerability. I remember once talking to a client, and this was it was a welding shop, blue collar, very rough, great guys, a machine shop, and we're talking about some new technologies we put in. I'll never forget the expression he used. He goes, Joe, are you using a mallet to squash an ant? It's just so much here. I mean, do we really need that much?
Yep.
And he was right. We're just engineers or technology led. A lot of these MSPs just overthinking this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that complicated. Especially back then, it wasn't as complicated as it is now, and the vulnerabilities are there. So we talked about a definition of an MSP from the vendor level, from the MSP level. We talked about how MSPs can work maybe with those MSPs, how they can find each other. What else about have we not covered in the managed service provider industry, and how we can help both MSPs and vendors marry?
So then the number one thing that I've been focusing on there, which is this game is about risk management now, way more than ever before. Like by leaps and bounds, this is a risk management game. Because again, when we were guys like you and me were starting out 20 years ago, I always the biggest thing that I would stay up at night worrying about was, did I mess up the backups in some way that I'd lose their data? Like, literally, that was the only thing that really ever kept me up.
Right.
Was I knew that because I knew if I had backups, there's nothing that could stop me, right? Like, I was fine. With the introduction of the current landscape, that's actually not true anymore, right? Because
Right.
even good backups won't necessarily stop me from, like, extortionware, or like being, or having them certain kinds of ransomware, or there's even new versions of the exploitation where it's coming, where it's not, it's going even beyond extortionware to like complete like disclosure and disinformation campaigns. Like, there's just so much more now to the risk of this. And particularly when I think about the relationship between the provider and the vendor, understand that most of the time the vendor is asking the provider to take all the risk. That is the ask oftentimes, particularly if I'm thinking about this from a cybersecurity perspective. Either you're a cybersecurity vendor or you're just not, and you have to factor on the security. The software vendor takes very little risk, if any. They have great lawyers, they have deep pockets, they have long legal agreements, there's huge limits of liability. If you read those end user license agreements, they're not responsible for anything, right? Like, just anything. Versus the provider, who is delivering a set of services based on expertise and is actively taking on a certain degree of risk by engaging their customers even if they're not delivering a cybersecurity solution. Like, so for example, if you're doing a financial management solution, even around something like QuickBooks Online, right? Like, you make a mistake, you're opening yourself up to risk in a way that's very different. And the one thing that I want vendors and solution providers to be working on right now is the idea of recalibrating that risk, particularly when I look at software vendors and I go, you've got really deep pockets, you've got really big capability, you've got the ability to invest more and take more risk on that's mutually beneficial and theoretically make you different from your competitors. If I'm looking at 20 security solutions and one of them says that they're going to share the risk with me and they're going to put some money involved, that's an instant differentiator. And you talk about a true partnership. Yeah, that's a true partnership where we're sharing risk, not just sharing the upside, but sharing the downside risk too. And by the way, I'm totally cool with a vendor being rigid about some of this stuff and having requirements, and like that's a good thing. That drives us towards a better place. But I want this conversation between the two to be much more open about risk management.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, the discipline of just selecting a key partner and bringing on risk. Imagine that. Imagine if some of them did that. That would really be tremendous. Well, Dave Sobel, you're the absolute best. I always love talking to you, with you, about you.
Oh, thanks.
Remind us how we can to reach out to you. How can we contact you?
Sure. So anybody's interested in actually hearing more drivel, I do a daily podcast called The Business of Tech. It's available on all the podcatcher platforms. You can find it at businessof.tech online. There's an online version of it. Big blue button to find it on all the platforms. I'm also on YouTube, link right there on businessof.tech. That's where you can all get it. If anybody's interested in reaching out to me, all my social stuff is right there as well. You can find me online. There's even a big blue button to get some time on my calendar if you want to chat and riff. So I make myself available to the community. I'm here advocating for solution providers. I'm here to help.
Dave Sobel, thanks again. You are the best. I look forward when we talk again. You have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Be well.
You too.